Hello! Today I'd like to review Climber, The Sky's the Limit. As the name suggests, the game is about mountain climbing. You'll be taking on a number of peaks in the Himalayas, culminating in an attempt to take on K2, one of the most dangerous peaks in the world. Special thanks go to the developers A2 Studio and Art Games Studio, and the publishers Art Games Studio and gdevs.com for the review key. This review is based on 20 hours of gameplay. All opinions are solely the author's. You're all busy people, so let me answer your most pressing question first. Are you going to enjoy it? The 30-second spiel is that this game puts you in the shoes of a mountaineer, challenging some of the most difficult climbs in the world. It's a simulation of what it's like to be a climber, and you'll have to take care to avoid succumbing to the elements or simply breaking down mentally. You'll be challenged by obstacles that you'll have to bypass on your way to the summit. Carefully studying your chosen route and selecting your equipment is a must, because it's entirely possible to fail if you didn't plan properly. If that sounds like something you'd like, then stay with me and I'll delve deeper into the details. It's not difficult to come across documentaries of people attempting to climb some of the tallest peaks and how deadly the sport can be.
There is a struggle, there is a fight in every breath, in every thought. Everything hurts, every limb, every cell is screaming oxygen, oxygen, oxygen.
In this game, you take the role of someone attempting to take on several mountains in the Himalaya ranges. There's 6 at the moment, 1 tutorial and 5 others. Not surprisingly, K2 is the final peak you challenge. To mirror the danger, you have 4 vital signs that you have to track: stamina, mental health, nourishment and temperature. Any activity you do, like climbing or anchoring ropes, but also including just standing around, will use up some of these vitals. Running into conditions like high winds or blizzards will also worsen the loss of vitals. If any goes to 0, that's it. You will be sent back to the last checkpoint. You're only allowed 3 such failures before the attempt is over. To help you avoid that outcome, each mission will allow you to purchase equipment. At first you can only access basic equipment, but as you accrue money and prestige, better versions will become available. Usually you will have to spend your own money to succeed. The early mountains guide you in what items to take, but in later mountains, it's entirely up to you, and you can fail because you chose poorly. Maybe you didn't bring enough anchors and ropes, or ran out of food, or you simply froze to death because the clothing you chose just wasn't warm enough. The game claims to draw from real-life mountaineering experience. I don't have the personal experience to confirm that, but the detailed nature of the vitals and equipment systems definitely shows a lot of thought. At the start of each expedition, you're given a map of the available routes and the obstacles you'll meet on each. That allows you to plan your loadout and mentally prepare for what you need to do. But equipment can weigh a fair amount. As you might expect, the more you carry, the more difficult it is to move. That's reflected in the game by a penalty that causes your vitals to drop faster the more encumbered you are. Advanced versions of items help by being lighter or giving you less penalty for activities like climbing. But of course, they cost more, so you have to juggle different needs. But it's not just weight you need to think about. If your gear is unevenly distributed in your backpack, you'll get an extra penalty due to the extra effort you need to exert to stay on your feet. So when planning your loadout, you have to literally carry out a balancing act of what gear you can afford, how much it will weigh you down, and finally packing your backpack. You can repeat mountains you've already climbed to gain extra prestige, which will make better types of equipment accessible, and money, which you spend to acquire that gear. At first, all of these details can be difficult to get your head around, but it will become easier to grasp once you've actually climbed a few mountains. Once you're on the mountain, you'll quickly realize that every activity you do uses up different amounts of vital. But even just standing around drains your vitals over time. So you want to be always progressing towards the summit, but at the same time minimizing the effort you're expending. You're always on the clock. You'll run across several types of hazards, and each comes with a minigame that simulates the challenges involved. Climbing rocky ledges should be fairly familiar to anyone who's played survival or nature-based games in the past. There are some small ledges that you can't just jump onto, but doing a series of climbs will significantly drain your vitals, particularly stamina. Crossing crevices involves placing the ladder and balancing your way across it. You'll always be leaning to one side as you cross, so using the keys to lean the other way is vital to avoid falling. Snowy drifts are fine as long as you have a snow stick to determine which way is safe. It involves tapping every so often and walking on the green colored spots. If they collapse, it is sometimes possible to bypass the pits, but not always. Icy and rocky surfaces will require you to plant screws and attach ropes to secure your progress. This takes a bit of time, and it's surprisingly draining on your stamina. You have to do it every 10 meters though, and if you didn't bring enough screws and rope, then your expedition is over. But keep in mind that ropes are pretty heavy, so you want to bring only just enough to cross, but no more. Again, what you did during planning matters. There's also vertical climbs over rocky or icy surfaces. Climbing rocky cliffs involves picking handholds, but some handholds can be risky. Mechanically, this involves a minigame of clicking on the handholds, with the riskier ones color-coded. The ice wall climbs are a bit more involved. Here the player physically climbs the wall, with colored symbols again denoting the risk. There is also the risk of falling debris to be taken into account. I have to say that physically climbing, like happens with ice walls, is far more immersive than the minigame of clicking on handholds, even though both scenarios essentially involve avoiding risky handholds. Just the act of seeing the wall from the first-person perspective and directly controlling your character increased immersion. Adding variability is that you can also run across environmental conditions like high winds or exposure, which increases your risk of freezing. Fog and blizzard also reduce your visibility and put you at risk of falling into crevices because you might not see them. If you inspect the map, you can see where you're likely to run into different situations, and your weather forecast will forewarn you about conditions in the next few days. Time passes surprisingly quickly, and night is very dark like it should be. You can keep going with the aid of a lamp, but batteries are limited, and it's a better idea to camp for the night and rest. The only ways to recover vitals are by eating and other consumables, or by sleeping. A hot soup before going to sleep will do wonders for getting rid of the cold, and the quick energy bar before a climb might just be what you need to make sure you can avoid falling off. If the forecast says that the next day will be blizzardy, then it might be worth just sleeping an entire day and get well rested before proceeding. Better be safe than sorry. Of course, that means that you have to pack a tent, a sleeping bag, a stove, and food to cook. They weigh a lot, and lugging all that will reduce your stamina even faster. But it's unavoidable for the more difficult mountains. One thing to note is that each mountain keeps track of your best times, and there's a leaderboard where you can see the best times of other players. It seems that the design is intended for the climbs to be time trials, which does have a lot of knock-on effects in the way the game plays, as we'll discuss. The core principle of the game's design is balancing competing needs. You have a variety of needs, represented by vitals, that must be balanced against the burden of the equipment you need to stay alive and get to the summit. I was very impressed by the detail in the selection of equipment and how you have to make sure to spread it out when packing. The immersion does drop off a bit when climbing though. The use of minigames for getting across obstacles does tend towards the simpler side. When I first came across this game, I was interested because I played a lot of The Long Dark. What that game does very well is take a number of parameters, adds variability to them, and allows emergent gameplay to take place. For instance, you wake up early in the morning. It's usually the coldest time of the day, but if the weather is foggy, it's a bit warmer than normal, so you might be able to avoid getting too cold. But on the other hand, fog means visibility is bad. Do you still set off, or do you wait for the day to warm up and the fog to clear? That's not a scripted situation. It can happen in any given day. Two separate parameters, the time of day and the current weather condition, combine to present the player with an emergent situation. But other parameters also exist that you have to consider. Do you have enough food and drink to wait until conditions improve? Is this place safe from predators? Are you currently injured and need to rest? Individually, these parameters are simple, but when combined, the player is presented with an emergent situation that they need to assess. And throughout the game, the player must continuously make decisions as parameters change, each of which might potentially lead to their death. To be clear, Climber does present many similar parameters in its vitals and conditions. The foundations of the game are very solid. But each of the obstacles plays almost like a self-contained minigame. Conditions like blizzards only contribute to how much vitals you lose. They do not seem to affect the difficulty of the activities. For instance, if you try and cross a ladder during a blizzard or high winds, the balancing act doesn't seem to become any more difficult than during calm conditions, which is not what I'd expect in a situation like that. If there's one thing I would wish the game focused more on, it would be on retaining the uncertainty of mountaineering and allowing the player to judge for themselves instead of telling them information. For the most part, situations and obstacles tend to be follow the cues without too much thinking required once you know what you're doing. Part of using color-coded cues is due to what I see as the developers trying to make the game accessible to a broader audience. Part of it is due to the amount of work and detail that will go into giving rocks enough detail to allow you to see where the handholds are. All of that is understandable. I'm mentioning this more as a potential evolution of the game's concept. Though I am glad to have noticed that there are some situations where the player is given visual cues, such as ice being distinctly different from snow. To illustrate the point about uncertainty, Climber tells the player the forecast, and the weather will be exactly as the forecast says it will be. This is the result of the game's focus on climbs being time trials. In that situation, you want to remove as much uncertainty as possible, because otherwise random factors would have the biggest impact on a player's time. You want times to be comparable, so making the weather and conditions predictable is desirable. On the other hand, the long dark shows the player a darkening sky, maybe some light snow starting to fall too. From those hints, an experienced player might deduce that there's a chance of a blizzard. It might not happen, but the chance is there. Do you push on or do you seek shelter? The situation is similar in both games, but the long dark presents the player with choices to be made and uncertainty about what will happen, whereas the decision in Climber is straightforward. A similar situation exists in the routes you can choose. The long dark also has specific points that connect different locations, but generally the player is free to choose their own path. They might take into account the availability of shelter, food, fuel, and danger. In Climber, the routes might have optional branches, but generally the player is restricted to specific paths, and you regularly get directions of what to do while playing. This is realistic, of course. There's only a few safe paths up to the highest peaks, but it does highlight how static things are in Climber, and emphasizes that adding more variance to the conditions might help retain that sense of uncertainty that's inherent in mountaineering, and keep the player thinking about the next decision rather than just following well-rehearsed steps. But I will emphasize that it all makes perfect sense within the time trial nature of the game as it is now. I have compared Climber to the Long Dark quite a bit. That's not because the Long Dark is a perfect game, or because Climber is a terrible one. It's because of the similarities both games have about dealing with survival in cold conditions, and the lessons Climber might take from the Long Dark's use of emergent gameplay and uncertainty in every moment, which is what's given it the hardcore fanbase that it has. Climber is a game that showcases a unique experience in a challenging way. The early mountains aren't very difficult, but as you unlock later ones, this spikes up quite a bit. I wasn't able to waltz up to the summit in my first attempts, and actually had to change my gear and retry many times before I succeeded on each mountain. This speaks well for the challenge in the game. At the same time, I do believe that the concept could be taken that much further. Emphasizing player judgment and choice would improve things significantly. But I do recognize the technical difficulty and effort involved, so I wouldn't hold that against the game as it currently stands. It's more about the potential it has. Climber is a game intended to appeal to players who enjoy survival type experiences. It asks you to plan your route and choose your equipment to deal with the dangers. Then deal with the cold and treacherous conditions as you execute on that plan. You will need multiple tries to beat even the tutorial mountain at first, but as you become more proficient, you'll begin doing better. The game has an excellent foundation in simulating what it's like to go mountaineering. Some of the minigames involved in the climb can tend towards the simplistic side, so there is room for improvement in future instances. This is a game that has an interesting premise, a very solid foundation, and much future potential. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. Let me know what you thought about it in the comments. Feel free to leave a like, subscribe and hit the bell button to be notified when new videos come out. See you soon.